Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. You are in the right place for the cloud as a success factor in digital transformation. Our event sponsored by Ziff Davis and Pluralsight. Glad to have them sponsoring this event and getting everything organized. Our featured speaker today is Richard Lee. He's a trusted advisor, speaks a lot about data leadership, privacy, digital transformation. I'll give you a little more background about Richard in a moment. But Richard, I really want to ask you a question as we kicked things off here. I'm looking back at our title, and we're talking about success factors in this digital transformation, obviously move to the cloud. Is there a number one success factor that you've either come across as a pattern or that you have in mind when it comes to teams that are going to succeed when moving to the cloud?
Hi, James. Great question. Yeah, I think the most important thing is to think strategically when you make your cloud decisions. Don't let budget or cost factors drive the final decision. And I think we'll explore that quite a bit more during the course of our conversation today.
Yeah, the strategy piece is something that I've been having more conversations on over the years. We've all heard the mantra, move to the cloud, move to the cloud. But you have to have a strategy, not only today's strategy, but an idea of what you're going to look like as an organization down the road. I know you're going to talk more about that. Folks, Richard Lee is a frequent contributor to Ziff Davis. He does have a consultancy vehicle, IMEX, and again, we're glad that we could get some of his time today for this presentation to share with all of you. You can share with all of us. Questions and comments encouraged. We've got about 30 minutes or so of planned presentation. We've got a couple polls in there, so you'll be able to touch your machine and share your thoughts on those. And then we'll have about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. We're going to try and get you out about 45 past the hour. Really, that's going to give you time, get ready for your next meeting or so, but we're also going to encourage you, spend a little time over at the Pluralsight site so you can get some more information on some of the ideas and things that we're talking about here today. So with that, what I want to do is kind of turn things over to you, Richard, so we can get a little more of kind of a thought from you, your thesis, kind of where you're going to take us for the next 30 minutes or so.
Okay, thanks, James, and welcome everybody. I hope you're enjoying our early spring weather as much as I am here in Seattle. I'm going to talk today about the cloud as what I would consider a critical success factor in both your digital strategy as well as your digital transformation efforts. As with all my presentations, whether live or a webinar, I usually want to talk a few remarks up front to sort of set the tone. So needless to say, we're inundated in our daily lives with the cloud being either promoted to us, its virtues being extolled by pundits and advisors like myself, or your local IT vendor knocking on your door asking you to buy some more cloud. And it's really become a siren song. Just as an example, in preparing for this webinar, just in the last couple of days, there's been major cloud articles and announcements and promotional materials just streaming out of everywhere to either drive people to convergence around what they should do, or I think in many cases scare them into not making any decisions. So I'm going to help to overcome the latter here by giving you the tools and the insights I think necessary to make a good cloud decision, but more importantly, help you to understand how it really dovetails as a critical success factor for whatever your digital endeavors are today, much less in the future. So two basic points I think we covered on one: strategy is critical. The other is that you really need to look at the cloud objectively and make decisions based on your needs as opposed to what people are trying to sell you at the moment. So let me get into just a little bit more background on myself before we get into the main meat of the topic. As James said, I am an advisor. I've spent quite a bit of my career in consulting as well as in some executive roles for consulting clients. I very much focus on digital and digital transformation these days because it is an area with not only a great deal of opportunity but a great deal of hype. I think a lot of organizations struggle to cut through that to make some meaningful decisions on their part. I do think that there is a major increase in the role of leadership as we promote these capabilities around digital data analytics, and that there is a necessary for us to have literacy at all levels, especially outside of the IT domain, where we really have a lot of business leaders, a lot of government leaders who are really illiterate in the technologies that they're either promoting or being asked to promote. If you look at almost any transformation program today, leadership is the number one criteria for success or failure. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the comments today. I'm looking forward to an engaging Q&A session at the end, and I think James and I are going to have some interesting polling discussion along the way as well, too. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about cloud readiness and strategy, those critical elements of success. We're going to talk about how you can prepare your organization to exploit cloud and to do a seamless migration to those cloud-based solutions based on your competencies, your timeline, and your overall strategic needs. How to evaluate cloud partners. That's a very difficult area for a lot of organizations to get around because there's a lot of incumbency there in terms of software that they've purchased for their enterprise or that they've had on-premise for some time. It provides some conflict about how to break that relationship if needed while moving to the cloud. And where is the cloud going to go in the future? And finally, we'll wrap up with some summary remarks and that engaging QA that I mentioned earlier. So much about what we're going to talk about and myself. Let's get cracking on the real content of the process with a poll to sort of set the stage for the discussion altogether. So I'll let James jump in here and guide everybody through the polling process.
Yeah, and pretty simple here, folks. We just want kind of a level set, which is going to help part of the conversation here, but get an idea. Where are you with your company? Transitioning to a cloud provider? Are you already using a cloud provider, or are you establishing a hybrid cloud solution? And again, I think that, Richard, a lot of the teams will give folks an opportunity to let us know where they're at, but this is definitely a journey, right? This is a move, and so you're going to go through these different stages, and having that plan, again, back to some of your opening comments, it just seems that has to be what's there, because the teams that don't have a plan, don't realize it's more of this journey, those are the ones that I've seen stumble. Has that been your experience as well?
I think with any change that is at the level of what we call transformational, there is a great deal of emphasis on the plan itself and then the seamless execution of the plan. But many organizations feel forced by either competitive pressures or by changes in technology to sort of jump the gun and go through the shoot, ready, aim exercise. And I think a lot of them have come back to find that in retrospect, the cloud decision they made early on based on less than fulsome criteria has really come back to bite them. And, I think as part of this poll, you get a good idea of where people are. Most people have applications in the cloud already by default. That's the only way that it can be delivered. But more importantly, they have multiple clouds that they're being serviced by. And in many cases, they don't even know that their data, much less the application, is in the cloud. So that's an awareness factor as well from
And you see on the results here that I brought up on the screen, Richard, the idea of establishing a hybrid cloud solution. Most vote getters, just under 50% there of this audience, and we're in the multiple hundreds online with us today. So big turnout here. Any surprise in these numbers that you see on screen?
No, I think these track with the reality of the marketplace. I have a couple of statistics in the next couple of slides we'll get into that will validate a lot of what the audience is already experiencing. And then I think we get into some of the more muddied areas, which is, beyond a plan, what are you actually doing to make a cloud decision? So looking forward to getting into that component coming up next year.
All right. We'll have another poll, folks, in a little while, so appreciate y'all participating in that. Again, continue to get your questions and comments in. I already see some of those coming in the queue, Richard, so I'm going to look at those while you continue on.
Great. Thanks, James. So the cloud and digital transformation. Digital transformation for most organizations, it has to be a lot more than just simply digitizing our analog world that we live in. It's really incumbent for people who want to be digital to move to a digital architecture. And that's an architecture that almost by default these days is in the cloud. If you look at statistics around the world, more than 85% of all companies have moved to the cloud since 2010. Now, that's a huge uptake. That's why we see the proliferation of cloud offerings from virtually every vendor out there. That does not mean it's going to be sustainable. I think it's more of a dipping the toe in the water strategy for a lot of organizations because, as I said earlier, a lot of times the application that you want is only available in the cloud, so you have no choice. But then we look at the future, and there will be many applications which will only be cloud-based in the future, which today had been either on-premise or available in some hybrid fashion. And I think for most organizations planning around digital, there's going to be a progression as to whether they go right into the software as a service model or they start with infrastructure and then potentially over time move to platform as a service. So these are big considerations that all organizations, regardless of size, are having to come to grips with. And I think the most important common denominator that I'd like to sort of advise people is to have a strategic view of cloud and transformation that are for the long term rather than just trying to get some short-term results. Short-term results are important for validation, but they are not the end game at the outcome of your overall effort. So the other aspect of digital that really is challenging the existing physical infrastructure that most organizations have is around agility. There are a lot of application areas, a lot of new uses of data and analytics that require much more flexible and zero latency type of scenarios. They need to be incrementally added into organizations without going through the long life cycle of standing up an application, putting up 4 different types of environments around it, going through a go-live cycle. In many cases, this can be done in minutes, if not hours, in a lot of the cloud environments that are being offered. And I think that the most important thing is that digital is prophesized to most of the leadership teams in corporate and in government as a cost savings measure. Most of the validation of digital so far has been around how much cost it reduces. Most of that cost is around the physical IT estate in the analysis that I've seen and participated in. And it's not so much in terms of the cost of delivering a digital capability versus an analog capability. It's really around using different architectures and applications that are much more efficient to meet the needs of the organization. I think we have our second poll at this point, and I will let James jump back in and add some context for this one.
Yeah, and this is, again, we know that a lot of you are in that position of either setting up something in a hybrid environment, you're making, and you've got providers out there. So which providers are you currently using? AWS from Amazon, Azure, Google Cloud? Is it something other? If it's something other, you're more than welcome to type that into the Q&A. You can just type on in what that other is. I'll peruse through those and try and share some of those as we go forward. Or none. You don't have any yet. In fact, I know in the Q&A, I'm trying to look back through here, Alizier was in our audience and doing basically some good research here, Richard, and wanting to know some of the differences between AWS and Azure. And we've got other folks out there. I've got some folks that are also typing in here. Christy out there using AWS. A couple of folks are using combination. Wouldn't be surprised seeing AWS and Google, Shravan, Oracle Cloud, and others. And so there is one, many choices, and two, it looks like a lot of those choices are being used use. I'm going to give folks let me give you another 5 seconds to vote here on the poll, and then I'll go ahead and share that out with all of you, kind of so you can see and stack where those are. But a lot of the big names, no surprise, are the ones that are being used. We'll give you 3 seconds, folks. 2 seconds, and this is upwards of about 70% or so of our audience here today. So I appreciate you all quickly voting on that. Just squeaking out a tad we win would be Amazon's Web Services, just under 30%, real close there. Microsoft and their Azure offering, and then you see the other responses there. We often see kind of this two-headed race out there, Richard. I'm assuming, again, this isn't much of a surprise to you.
No, it's not, and it's very Seattle-centric, so it's hard to avoid around here the discussion of AWS versus Azure. And for those that subscribe to The Economist, there was a very interesting article this week on Microsoft's cloud strategy. The net is that there are going to be more cloud offerings than you have the clarity to be able to decide either about one exclusively or have enough facts to say one is actually better than the other. So cost has been, to date, one of the almighty dictators around cloud adoption, and I'm going to get into that in just a moment here as we talk about the why and the how. So I appreciate the poll results. They do track with the reality that I see out there, much less others. And I think that provides some good fodder for the discussion at this point. So let me talk in a couple of slides here about the why and the how, because I think this is the critical part for the audience today. These are the takeaways that you're investing your time to learn, so let's get into it. So Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and IBM, by the way, are the dominant cloud providers in the market. And each of them has, in some respects, an equal share, depending on how you would like to characterize them, because they do support different cloud capabilities, some exclusively, some do it all together. But they do go after enterprise to small to medium business or small to medium enterprise, public, private, hybrid, whatever combination you would like to have. And there's no lack of competition. And the ironic aspect of a lot of the competition is that it's really other companies hosting their applications and platform on somebody else's cloud, but then branding it as their cloud. And that provides a lot of difficulty for people, especially on the procurement side, to ferret through in terms of understanding, whose actual cloud are we using and what terms and conditions and opportunities and rights do we have to go with this. So that's a big part of the analysis phase that every organization needs to invest a lot of time in. And as I said when James asked me at the very beginning, what is the most important thing? Well, if you look at Amazon, who's been, really the cloud early market leader, they've had 53 price reductions in the course of the last 5 to 7 years. Each price reduction is meant to give more value to either existing customers or to appear as more attractive to new customers. But the thing is, it hasn't mitigated some of the outage issues that all of them face. So no matter how cheap, no matter how many people are sitting on their cloud, you can't solve the issue around outages very easily because it's really human error in many cases. The most recent AWS outage was that. It has a lot to do with the last mile of infrastructure, which is really between your data center or your remote office location and wherever the connection point to the cloud is. And in many cases, these outages are what I call BTC. They're beyond the control of the provider. So if you look at your terms and conditions in your cloud agreements, you will see a lot of language mitigating those risks to the cloud provider and sort of transferring those risks to you as the subscriber or purchaser. So buyer beware is what my credo is throughout this presentation. And these challenges are not going to decrease. As we see the impacts of more and more regionalized privacy and government surveillance activities, there will be more and more independent clouds springing up in very specific geographies, offering very specific types of scenarios for customers to use. And that's not a bad thing. It's being reactive to the needs of the market. But, just based on the law of statistics, the more independent cloud nodes, much less independent cloud providers we have out there, the higher the propensity for failure is going to be. And then we have all of the issues around cyber protection and the new regulation for data protection coming on stream in something like 300 days in Europe, much less the rest of the world. All of these things will have tremendous cloud impacts, and it's really forced the cloud providers to rethink a lot of their not only transparency capabilities, but their terms and conditions in their contracts. So this is another area that everybody needs to do a lot of due diligence around, make sure that the language is unambiguous in terms of what your absolute needs and requirements are, and put it into your contract. Do not have a handshake understanding on any of these things. So all clouds are not equal is clearly the message there, to go with buyer beware. Cloud success, in my opinion, is driven by the strategy that you create to either support your digital transformation using the cloud, or independent of digital transformation, if you haven't engaged in that yet, your cloud strategy et al. So, why are we doing this? What are the benefits and the risks? And the risks are what we are willing to assume, not necessarily what we are going to try and force on the cloud providers, because the one thing that most of them have taken a pretty hard stand on is that we will only assume so much risk. We will offer a sort of tiered services in respect to that risk, but at some point, because you're using the cloud and you're taking advantage of the cost benefits provided by it, you own a certain amount of risk going forward, and it's non-transferable. How do we select the right cloud option? And I think in many respects, even the polling data from today, is most organizations probably have at least 2 cloud providers already, and it would expect that there would be numerous others in the future, depending on whether you're buying a software as a service, whether you're using it strictly for infrastructure, or if you're really jumping in with both feet and going for the platform as a service approach. So what is our plan to decide upon it, and then what's our plan to actually execute upon it? How do we actually migrate from on-premise to cloud? Do we do it big bang? Do we look at this as sort of an application upgrade, or do we take baby steps and potentially run co-operations for a while until we get that level of confidence, and then we cut over in a go-live scenario to the cloud? These are all driven by your particular requirements, not by the cloud industry, both in terms of their preferred best practices, but more importantly, their contractual rhetoric. You need to migrate to the cloud based on what works for you, and you need to define those decision criteria right up front so that there is no ambiguity about go versus no-go. So I think that these are important hows and whys. And finally, the points that I really wanted to emphasize, I left for the last slide here, is readiness is your core responsibility. Whether you're an IT manager, you're an IT executive, whether you're a chief operating officer or one of the numerous CXOs that have responsibility or accountability for digital and associated programs, you need to be ready for this, and that takes preparation up front. It is not the traditional change management will make our people ready as we go through the program. It's really an upfront readiness responsibility. So as part of your strategy, you need to have a readiness component that you are going to engage in immediately. And you have to have a team approach to be able to prepare for this migration and ultimate go live, because it cannot just be left on the shoulders of the IT department to pull off successfully. There's far too many moving parts, far too much risk for any single person to manage in terms of the area of responsibility. And because it is within the realm of mission critical, or at least in terms of business continuity, a reliability requirement, everybody in that domain needs to be involved. And I think for the IT executives, the IT managers, it's really a matter of you taking an aggressive approach to getting your staff ready with the right skills, the right capabilities, the right mindset to be able to not only plan, but to orderly manage the process of migrating to a cloud solution and testing it and eventually going live with it at the appropriate time. So if you follow these 3 slides worth of how and why, then I believe you're able to get to the critical success factors in terms of measuring, what it is that you expected versus what you got, how to optimize that, and ultimately how to achieve the benefits from the cloud strategy that you developed in its associated role of enabling the successful outcome of your digital transformation. So most importantly, make sure that your digital strategy, including the cloud components, is aligned with your core organizational strategy. If you're in the public sector, that's typically a business strategy that has both short and long-term components. What is your organization achieving to do, and how is digital an enabler of that? And within that digital enabling capability set, there's definitely cloud. And cloud can be both disruptive as well as enabling. It will be disruptive in terms of the status quo around on-premise versus not, but it can also be disruptive in terms of business processes, business capabilities, et cetera, and that needs to be embedded in the strategy itself. And I think the most important thing is doing digital for the sake of just doing digital is of little value. It needs to be a source of competitive advantage, and that applies to whether or not you're in the private sector, the public sector, or nonprofit. Whether you're serving customers as citizens or as people that you woo with your products, you need to give them an experience that's higher and higher up the level of making them not only loyal but highly engaged and extremely happy, and at the same time reducing cost, because cost is the almighty dictator that everybody keeps fighting. Another critical success factor, which I spoke of a few minutes ago, is staff readiness, especially in the IT area. That readiness needs to be aligned with the long-term view of execution. So we can't just run around and get everybody up to speed overnight and then expect those skills to not attrit if we're not going to use them right away. So we need to plan readiness around requirements of the long-term execution plan. We need to think long and hard about what systems integration or cloud partners we choose, what vendors we work with in terms of software as a service or ultimately as a cloud provider, if not both. We need to look at incumbencies there. We need to take a very hard look at, are these incumbent relationships going to be the same relationships going forward, or are we going to have some disruption in that as we look to new applications and new services that come from different organizations that we either previously didn't have a relationship with or may have had a much smaller relationship with. And then I think, engaging your customers in this journey to not only get feedback, but to show them what, new things that you're bringing on to ultimately delight them and incent them is a big part of critical success factors that I would look at any digital and cloud strategy signing up to. And I think control is a major part of the process in terms of not only optimization of the outcome, but risk mitigation to go along the way. So you have a strategy, you've gone through an evaluation process, you've chosen your cloud partner, if not partners. You have very specific deliverables that you're expecting at certain time frames. You've got your team all ready to go and capable of assuming their operational, much less their transformational responsibilities. But you have this control element that you need to maintain during the entire process, because it will not just fly on its own. You need to trust but verify everything that's in your contractual understanding with your cloud provider, and don't allow them to push back on the notion of audit, much less routine audits. You need to take a multipathing approach. There will be problems with last mile that you will have to mitigate, either through backup or through primary, secondary with auto failover capabilities around your network and other critical infrastructure components. You need to come up with measurable SLAs and RTOs that you can run fire drills against, that you can validate are being achieved. It's no sense paying for them if you can't actually measure them. You should always do some type of pilot operation before you ever make your contract decision, whether it's a proof of concept, whether it's a single application running under a real workload or a simulated workload. You have to do something to try this. Do not take anything on faith. And I think you can extend that to the notion of a bake-off where you have several different organizations bidding for your business who are going to compete in an open and transparent way to win that business, and you select the criteria for them. But another component that needs to be part and parcel to that conversation is, how do we escalate if we have problems? What is our escalation path that is going to give us the RTO that we want, and how do we build that into the contract so there's no ambiguity? And I think the most important part of any strategy is to have a forward view. Do not just ground yourself in the mundane of what we need today or what we need in the next couple of years. You really need to have a long-term path that you lay out in your strategy that puts you on a progression to move from, simple infrastructure in the cloud to applications, if not all applications in the cloud, where you essentially remove all of your on-premise capability, and then more importantly in the digital domain, moving to platform as a service, where you have an entire platform of digital capabilities that are hosted in the cloud around different geographies that you do business in or that you serve your constituents in, and that it performs equally in all of those domains from both a deliverable perspective as well as a cost-benefit perspective. So that's a lot for IT organizations to take on their own in terms of planning and execution. That's why I say that there are many other C-level stakeholders in this process. It is not strictly a IT deliverable. When you design a digital strategy, it is representative of the organization's needs altogether in alignment with the core strategy. The cloud strategy is not, pushed down the ladder from there. It is not subordinated. It is just as critical. So if you believe that cloud is the enabler for digital, then it has to be an area of responsibility and accountability that lines up with all the different executives who have a key role in that process. So I'm going to get through the summary here, and then we're going to get to the more interesting part, which is the Q&A. So to summarize in 4 short points, cloud is a major component of digital strategy and your transformation. It can be part of other strategies and transformation endeavors as well, but digital is the one that's sort of the catch-all bucket today that everything is being thrown into. Do not let it be subordinated to digital. It is just as critical because it enables digital. The cloud isn't a magic bullet. If you're going to have a propensity to move things from on-premise to the cloud, it's not going to be a free lunch. It's going to be something that will require cost planning, risk management, and seamless execution to see the outcomes that you want. There are a lot of different cloud offerings out there these days. There are a lot of different price points to go with these cloud offerings. It is not something that you just want to say, I paid $1 for it today, and I'm only going to pay $1 for it tomorrow, even though I might get a little bit more capacity based on its propensity to reduce cost. The cloud should increase its value over time, not just keep its cost factors stable or have them be slightly reduced. There's got to be more in this than just cost containment or cost mitigation. And finally, it's all about preparation. You can work yourself into a sweat about strategy and strategic planning because it's not an area that you've been intimately involved in or that you're typically invited to the table. But the most important thing is that you know your area of the business or IT. You bring that expertise to the table and you plan collectively in a methodical fashion to get a strategy and an execution plan that meets your requirements. One that's definitely going to be cloud-centric as we go forward. So with that, Here's a little shameless pitch for myself, which you can pick up in the slides afterwards. There's some good material here from Pluralsight to add some additional knowledge base to your organization, and I think they have some very interesting tools for everyone who's considering how do I plan for this readiness requirement. And as we run right up to the appropriate time for Q&A, here we go. So I will hand it off to James to coordinate, and looking forward to some interesting engagement here.
Yeah, and Richard told me he was going to go about 35 minutes, and guess what? 35 minutes on the dot, so nice work on that. We do have a lot of good questions in here, folks. You can continue to submit questions. We'll take about 10 minutes. If we don't get to your question, we will capture it, and we'll work offline to get you something. I want to key off on something that came in from Jose and some other folks here, and it was the idea of, do we put everything in one basket, or do we look at multiple vendors? And I'll ask the question then, Richard, in this way. Is there a reason that a team would look to just use one vendor, one cloud provider, put all their eggs in one basket? Is there a scenario where you see, where you recommend that, where you say, hey, this is a good idea?
I think there's always an exception to the rule of, spread your risk. I do think that there are situations around specific applications, around specific geographical scenarios, where a single cloud is the only approach that's viable. Having said that, then you have to really look at managing that relationship, both contractually as well as operationally, much less financially as a result of both of those, to get the outcome that you want. So I have a lot of empathy for one-of kind of situations, but I don't want the audience to believe that one-of should drive every decision. So there are a lot of offerings out there. As I've said many times during the course of this webinar, not all clouds are equal, so you have to do your due diligence. You have to do some basic analysis around risk and opportunity and reward. But I do think that if you're stuck in a situation where you have only one choice, then you have to make that choice acceptable to you in terms of criteria that you set out for your organization.
Let's move on over here. I hope it did too, Jose. If you have anything else to follow up with, feel free to send back in. Moving over to John here. Want to get into a little bit on some verticals, and we'll see if we can tackle any of this, Richard. He's specifically looking at manufacturing and distribution companies and wondering if you have kind of any statistics. I'm guessing this would be potentially on cost savings, et cetera, that those companies in that vertical of manufacturing and distribution have had by moving their ERP systems to the cloud.
Well, I have a lot of familiarity with ERP, and I have a good level of familiarity with those industry sectors. Maybe a couple of data points that will help to frame the answer. One, B2B digital transformation is well behind the curve of B2C. And that means that a lot of organizations in those sectors are really still fighting, the tide around delivering a user experience that ties into the deep benefits that they've invested in their infrastructure around ERP and supply chain management. Now, most of those organizations have very mature solutions in that space, but they are very costly. So they're constantly looking for ways to mitigate that cost or to manage the risk potentially of one of these vendors just going away, because there's a lot of volatility in that space too. So to answer his question with perhaps a little bit of a strategic view, I would say, look, if you could combine your digital strategy of moving your B2B environment into a true digital application area, one where the back-end solution around ERP can be hosted in the cloud as well, so you get sort of a twofer out of that. That, to me, is a very creative approach. Now, the cost factors are going to be driven by the size and complexity of your environment. Most of those ERP vendors, at least the top-tier ones, all have cloud solutions to offer, and they also have partners who have cloud solutions to offer. So I don't think you necessarily have to be saddled to just the vendor itself of the application, but you may find integration partners of theirs who have that same application available in the cloud at perhaps a different price point. In standard consulting lingo, it all depends.
I love that. All depends, and it does. And that's why, again, I think a lot of what you heard from Richard, it talks about that planning. And he shared with us the real need to do that and get a good look at what your needs are now, what your needs are going to be in the future. Let's talk about Nikki's question here. Nikki talking about Azure, obviously the offering from Microsoft, but saying, hey, is that a good solution for a business like mine who is not currently Microsoft reliant?
Well, I think Microsoft's offering is very Microsoft-centric, so that's a question that is worth asking Microsoft if you have conversations with them. But I think that you'll find that if you are a Microsoft shop, Azure is a very compelling scenario. For those who are on different platform, like let's say Google Docs or Office, then obviously the Google approach probably would be more of a attractive price point. But I think in respect to both of those offerings, there are actually third parties who will host that same capability on their site as well, too. So it gets very muddied, in my opinion. And the whole idea of vendor allegiance, I think, is pretty much thrown out the window. I mean, you're not really stuck with any vendor going forward, although the existing vendors you work with may make it price prohibitive for you to move somewhere else.
I'm going to come back to one more question before we wrap things up. I want to make sure that folks are aware of a couple items. One, we do have some related resources that we want you checking out. Those are some links that will bring you to some additional white papers and webinars from Pluralsight, so please check that out and visit our sponsor online, pluralsight.com, for more information. Secondly, we have recorded today's presentation, so we will be sending out reminder emails. Usually within about 24 hours, we'll get that out to you so that you can have access to the archive. Anyone, and I saw the audience grew since the start, so anyone that missed anything will be able to come back and deal with, you can watch the archive, you can review anything that Richard talked about. We'll also have a PDF of the slide deck available for you in that archive as well. So that's something that I want you to be aware of. And I think the last question I'll come back to, I had mentioned Elysier was online with us and was looking at AWS and Azure, kind of new here, doing some research and all. Wondering if you could comment at all on those two between when it comes to cost management during development is the question, Richard.
Well, I think that both of these providers have very flexible scenarios around multi-tier environments, especially if you run, 3 or 4. And that, as we've seen with most enterprise software that's hosted on-premise, there's a very attractive price point for development environments. Now, a lot of times in development, you have resource constraints, especially when you're doing it on-premise, because they tend to set it up in environments that are small or highly constrained, and it's really just more of proof of concept and functional activity rather than real development. One of the real benefits of cloud altogether is the developer environment where you have, to use Amazon's own brand, elasticity. I mean, you can spin up resources and CPUs and whatever you want in a very quick fashion, strictly for development or test, and then collapse those after the fact with a very small investment in terms of cloud time, so to speak. That to me is very attractive, and that's why a lot of organizations have moved development, much less proof of concept, into the cloud rather than dragging stuff in on site to do anymore. I think that if you're evaluating that, then you really need to look at what are the specifics of your development environment, what are your anticipated needs, and does development ultimately lead to a hosted cloud solution for your organization? That's a leverage point that the consumer or customer in this case can use to get better pricing from the cloud vendor. So that's just a little tip for those that might not have thought of that.
Well, I appreciate it, Richard. Thank you for all the effort into this webinar here today. The cloud is a success factor in digital transformation. Again, some contact information online to read more from the items that Richard pens out there on a regular basis. Also from our sponsor, Pluralsight. You can visit their website, pluralsight.com, and there are some links in the resources area that are clickable, but it would take you to another webinar, State of the Cloud, AWS and Azure. So those that were looking for some more insights there, great resource, and also a white paper, 5 proven ways to motivate and retain your technology team, all about the learning. And it was one of those things that Richard, talked about early on, that you need to know, where is your team? How are they? Ready are they to be competent with some of these new tools and services that they'll be working with? So it's an important part of the conversation. My appreciation to Richard and the Pluralsight team, of course, to the Ziff Davis team as well for putting this event together. Wouldn't have been an event without all of you in the audience, so appreciate you taking time to join us. Again, look for the reminder email that will bring you back to the recording. Share that with colleagues that you think could benefit from tuning in and hearing some of these tips and ideas from Richard. And again, we want to wrap up at this time, giving you time to visit our sponsor and take some time to view the Pluralsight website, so pluralsight.com. With that, we wrap it up. Again, my name is James Hilliard, and we do look forward to talking to you all down the road.